It's great to see everyone. I'm Aaron Cordova, up here with Adam Fuchs. Excited to talk about what's going on with Accumulo. A lot of you are heavily involved with Accumulo. Some others are somewhat new, perhaps. So, if Accumulo were a domesticated yak, it would be 6 years old today as an open source project. So, happy 6th birthday to Accumulo. Yes. Want to talk a little bit about some of the things people are using Accumulo for. So obviously here in the DC area, there's a lot of applications that Accumulo is being used for from a government intelligence perspective, but there's a lot of other things too, so we want to kind of call out some of those. So Accumulo is being used in the finance industry for monitoring compliance and risk and storing lots of sensitive data sets. We see a lot of consistent demand from the financial space, so that's interesting. In fact, I just came from New York, where some of the folks we're working with are using Accumulo for some pretty interesting things. Accumulo is being used in the biopharma space to quote-unquote revolutionize healthcare, is all we're allowed to say.
Cool, right?
Yeah. Accumulo's been used in the air domain to maintain situational awareness, which is interesting, which is difficult because everything's got to be really fast, near real time types of things. Of course, Accumulo is being used in the cybersecurity domain. Adam knows a lot about that. Also in space, the space domain, situational awareness being maintained. And Accumulo is also being used to monitor risk in, I would say, relationships between companies, so vendors and suppliers and things like that. Yeah, logistics, a wide range of companies are using Accumulo for that. We see Accumulo being used in the online marketing analytics space. There's a company in Seattle called Amperity, a startup that's using it for that, and there's a couple others where they are trying to do analytics on a per customer basis, but also look across customers without exposing anybody's information to those who aren't supposed to see it. So that's an interesting trend. I would say that also happens in the cybersecurity domain for companies who are creating cloud services based on potentially hundreds of customers where they want to aggregate their data but also keep it logically isolated. Accumulo fits that use case really, really well. So we talk to a lot of folks who are thinking of Accumulo for those reasons. Accumulo is being used in some machine learning applications to help customers find the right products based on things they bought in the past, so things like recommendation engines. Also looking at customer trends when it comes to what they search for and things they look at. Aggregating all that information is still a big challenge for a lot of companies, and Accumulo serves that need really well. And then finally, of course, Accumulo is still crucial to a lot of intelligence and defense use cases where the data is highly sensitive and the mission requirements demand that you have very timely information. So with that, there's probably a lot of others that we haven't talked about as well that I'm looking forward to talking with folks here about today, but this is just a sampling. So I'm going to turn it over to Adam to talk about some improvements since the last time we talked.
Wait, so you want me to talk? I thought I was here to provide security.
Well, you're not just to look good.
Not just to look good? Well, good thing about that. Cybersecurity starts with physical security, right? Sure. But let me tell you guys about the project status since our last Accumulo Summit about a year ago. I guess the big thing is we've been invaded by mics here. So we got a new program committee chair here, Mike Wall. If you see him, shake his hand. He's over there. We got a couple of other mics that are new committers. I've been involved with the project for a while, but recognized as committers on the Apache project now. So we got Mike Walsh there and Mike Miller. And then I saw Ivan. Sorry, you're not a Mike, but I guess we can have the Mikes and Ivans. Mike and Ivan. There's something there anyway. Did I get the colors right on these? Are the mics red? Does anybody know that? Anyway. So the project's still growing. We've got 30 total PMC members. Anybody know what a PMC member is? Nobody knows that? Hopefully some of you know it since you're on the PMC. That's the Project Management Committee. Right, so Accumulo being an Apache project has a management committee. With Accumulo, we don't currently separate our committers from our PMC, so the people that have rights to commit code are also the ones that manage the project and kind of decide, who the other committers should be and what other rules we should follow. Beyond just the committers, though, we have a large number of contributors that have given us code or given us documentation improvement or all those types of things. So we're up to 83 total contributors now, which is pretty good. So in the last year, the mics have been busy, but so have a lot of other folks, right? So maybe just give a round of applause for these folks that have contributed a lot to the project since last year. Thanks. All right. You guys can see these slides later and read the names, or you can find all of this information on Jira. So you can go there and you can do queries and see who's working on what and what projects are interesting. Even find a project for you to work on. In the last year, we've also done two new releases, 1.7.3 and 1.8.1. So that's great. I mean, we're kind of keeping up with a pretty similar pace. These are point releases. I think a lot of people are kind of getting ready, thinking about what's going into 2.0 at this point. So that's something to start getting excited about. But beyond just the core project, we also have a number of other open source projects that use Accumulo at their core. So you're going to see a lot of talks today on these types of projects. I've got 5 of them here. I probably missed some other ones. These are the ones that I know about. So we've got Fluo, which is has done a couple of releases in the last year. Also graduated to a top-level Apache project, so it's a peer to Accumulo now. So that's great. GeoWave did another release, and GeoMesa did several additional releases. I think I'm actually missing 4 or 5 releases of GeoMesa in the last year. They've been busy, certainly. So GeoWave and GeoMesa are basically geographic search systems that are built on top of Accumulo. So they use Accumulo as the store for their index and do things like z-indexing on top of that. We've got a few releases of Timely, so for doing time series analysis on top of Accumulo. And RIA also did a release in the last year. So that's a graph database, an RDF-based graph database on top of Accumulo. So you can see we have a wide variety of applications that are supported in these projects that primarily use Accumulo as a core. So I think Accumulo is really providing a great foundation to bloom out into open source projects, right? And as Aaron mentioned earlier, quite a large number of commercial projects as well, like Aaron's company, my company, and many others. If we look at what the development is largely in Accumulo Core, in the last year, these are the different categories of tickets that have been closed. So I kind of went through them all and categorized them into my own categories. Other folks might choose slightly different ones, but I think what you'll see here is a lot of what we're spending time on are correctness issues. So these will be things like, in a certain circumstance, the value of X should be something else, right? And it's kind of minor things for the most part, but cleaning up cases where somebody filed a bug. Next to that is code cleanliness, right? And these are a lot of things like, we're cleaning up the code so that we can evolve it faster in the future, right? So that we can work on it more efficiently. And that kind of tells you, along with the documentation and metrics and monitoring, we're kind of in a spot now with Accumulo where we're getting ready for the next big thing. Right? We're cleaning up what we have now and maybe looking for what do we want to do next. If you look at the API improvement category, this is basically the new feature category for Accumulo. So we're not talking about a huge number of new features in Accumulo core. Right? Most of the new features that you see are in these derivative projects at this point. And that kind of leads to a question of, what should Accumulo's identity be? Historically, it's been a clone of Bigtable. Right? We've had a lot of success providing a sorted key value store that scales up. We've added a lot of things specific to the domains we've supported, like cell-level security, a lot of the various access control and encryption mechanisms are supported in there. But I think we're at a point with Accumulo where we kind of have to decide, what's the future identity of Accumulo. Now, it could be that we really want to provide support to all of these other open source projects that are using Accumulo, and that would be just fine. But there's also a lot of opportunities here to take in needs of these other projects and the needs of really a lot of different sectors, business opportunities, and see, do they need things like maybe secondary indexing inside of Accumulo? I think if you look at how Accumulo is run, it's a pretty standard open source project, but it's very different from how you might run a startup. So at a startup, if you're developing a product, you do things like create a product management group, which decides what are those core features that go into it. At Accumulo, we kind of have had those defined for many years, but I think it's maybe at a point now where the community ought to start thinking about adopting that kind of role and maybe taking on some more of the management structure that a startup might have. Right? Try to apply some of those techniques to it. So with that, let me turn it over back to Aaron, get his thoughts on that, and talk about some opportunities for how we might define the identity of Accumulo moving forward.
Yeah, so I'm looking forward to hearing folks' ideas on this too. I don't know if I have any novel ideas about this either, but there are some things that we've seen in the market that may be hinting to directions forward. I believe that Accumulo is occupies a niche in the big data world that is fairly unique. And I guess 6 or 5 years ago, or maybe 4 years ago, the first year we had this conference, I don't know if folks remember, Cloudera was there, and initially there was a lot of confusion around, well, how are we going to have these two projects out there, HBase and Accumulo? Does one need to eat the other one? There was a strong desire to merge the two somehow. But that hasn't happened, and I think the reason why is because the use cases and the demand that created Accumulo in the first place still exists, and it just isn't being addressed by anything else in the market. So what are those things? And I call those maybe opportunities to further strengthen Accumulo's position and maybe even grow into new areas. I would say also that shameless plug for my talk a little bit later, comparing Accumulo to HBase and Cassandra. Accumulo's continuing to grow in popularity among databases out there in the world. It's the 60th most popular database, period. That's including things like Oracle. I have a list of projects that is more popular than, which to me is interesting. And so come to that talk if you want to find out more. So one of the things that it's consistently people are turning to Accumulo for is, I guess, what I would call industrial strength security. So it's not that other projects don't have security. In fact, a lot of them have a lot of security options. But there's something about the way Accumulo has security built into its DNA and built in from the beginning that gives people kind of confidence to go to their management and say, this is what I think we should put all of our most sensitive data in and all of our most sensitive workloads. So extremely highly sensitive data that you find in places like intelligence, in the healthcare space, and in finance. People are regularly making the case to their organization that the foundation of their next generation data platform should be Accumulo, and rightly so. So Accumulo scales extremely well. It does have all the security guarantees that you would want, and it has the kind of performance that you need to build it into a centralized core that lots and lots of applications can use to extract their data. Another one that we see is, I don't think this is going away anytime soon, by the way. It doesn't seem like we at least run into any other products that to which Accumulo like loses the security battle. Accumulo seems to win that quite often. There's a version of that problem that I think is interesting, which is the not just I need to secure my data, but I have many security domains, distinct security domains, like thousands of security domains. So one example is, again, if I'm a cloud service provider, and I want customers to give me their data, and I want to host it securely and analyze it and then give them some answers, and I want to be able to look across all that data, I may have potentially hundreds of thousands of customers, each of which represents their own security domain. So there's a use case around not just security, but scaling that security in the number of unique customers or unique security domains. So cybersecurity has this. There are folks that want to build data science products and services that they want to sell to their customer but manage centrally. There are also just large organizations that have, say, thousands of salespeople, and they only want their salespeople to be able to access their customer data, but then have their managers access, all their salespeople's customers' data and so on. So you have to be able to manage these security domains at scale, not just in terms of the size of the data. So that seems to be a consistent reason for people to turn to Accumulo as well. And there's one more that I think is pretty interesting, which is what I call speed at scale. So not only do you have a lot of data, but you have to address issues that are emerging in the real world in near real time. So these are things where performance and scale are crucial. And there are a lot of projects out there maybe that you can put your data in and that scale just fine, meaning you can go from 2 servers to 4 servers to 10 servers, and that's great. And you'll find that a lot of the other open source big data projects are like that, and people are perfectly happy to have like 6 servers in production, and that's a huge win over their single MySQL server. But then there's these use cases that go far beyond that to where you need hundreds or even thousands of servers, and you need your performance to be really good at that scale. That's a place where you do find that other projects maybe don't keep up as well when you get into the larger and larger data sizes, where Accumulo can deliver consistent performance. So that's really important. As Adam said, there's a bunch of projects that have been built on Accumulo that themselves may put Accumulo into a unique space that isn't really being addressed anywhere else. Accumulo and Fluo is a good example. Google built the Percolator project to migrate or upgrade, I would say, their indexing strategy so that they could update their index more incrementally. There's a bunch of use cases you can think of like that where you would want some fairly complex processing to happen on a large data set where you want to give people interactive access to the answers. I think we're just scratching the surface of this opportunity. There's something called Graphulo, which is a kind of a graph database built on Accumulo. Graphs are extremely common, especially in the spaces where we work, but there's not a whole lot of graph-specific solutions out there. The Neo4j has been for a long time the kind of de facto graph standard. Something called Titan out there. There's the Tinkerpop stuff, but I think a really high-performing challenger to Neo4j would be an interesting role for Accumulo, perhaps. As Adam mentioned, there's a bunch of geo tools that have been built on Accumulo. Geography is one of those dimensions like time that you find almost anywhere. So having the ability to scale your geo solution to the size of a typical Accumulo cluster is a really attractive proposition. So we might see some uses for Accumulo in that space. Of course, it wouldn't be a tech conference if you didn't say all the buzzwords, including IoT and cybersecurity. I didn't use the word cyber there. I need to go back. Accumulo and temporal tools are becoming more and more important for the reasons of having lots of machine-generated data coming in. You need scale, but you also need to focus on the time aspect. And this space seems to be, I would say, maybe ripe for disruption. So we see a lot of players out there, like the older players, the cybersecurity players, seem to be getting a little bit long in the tooth. You do see some new companies emerging, but it's not clear yet that any of them have really tackled the scale problem as well as we've seen Accumulo do on time series data. That one is very, very interesting as well. And then, of course, there's things like Accumulo and projects like NiFi. And I don't want to just relegate this to ETL and the data warehouse market, but I'm sure there's a lot more you can do with Accumulo and NiFi, but that's still a big problem. So a lot of people have a tremendous amount of difficulty bringing all their data into a big data, a scalable system that's secure. I think NiFi and Accumulo do a great job of that. And that is still an area where I think the market has given Accumulo a little bit of space. And we find that folks are kind of putting these together in their own ways as well. So these are just a few ideas for things that we might want to think about. There's a couple other things that other scalable NoSQL stores have done that we might want to consider as well. One thing that I found out too, looking at where Accumulo is being used versus where Cassandra and HBase are being used, you definitely find a preference in terms of which markets use what technology. Part of that is because you get a community, but part of it is also because some of these tools have support for different use cases that Accumulo, frankly, I've seen do very well. So one of them Adam mentioned was secondary indexing. That enables a really powerful search capability. It's not something Accumulo has built in. It's not something that most people can. There's not like necessarily a lot of secondary indexing projects like there are for time series data and geodata that you can just pull down and deploy on Accumulo really easily. That's an interesting idea, as well as some other things that have been built into NoSQL databases around reliability. So these are things, I think there's a lot of areas where Accumulo isn't going anywhere anytime soon and is well positioned to kind of branch out a little bit. So I'm excited to hear through the rest of the talks today kind of what some of those ideas are. And so we're going to kind of give you folks a quick sense for kind of what things are going to be talked about today. And I'm excited to get a sense for kind of what the cutting edge is in Accumulo right now. And I think that will help inform us in terms of what are the obvious next steps, and then what are the things that are way out there that it's going to take some time to get to, but will require sustained focus. And those are perhaps the things we can start to get some consensus around. So you want to kind of trade off some of these?
Sure. Yeah, so we got a number of different interesting topics today that are going to be covered at the conference. I'm really excited to see most of these talks, maybe not yours, but yeah. Anyway, you guys can laugh. It's okay. It's okay. Now I just think you're laughing because I told you to.
That was definitely a courtesy lap.
Okay, so we got some security talks, practical Kerberos, which anybody who's used Kerberos knows how much of a pain in the ass it is. So Josh is going to tell us how to do it the right way and really easily, right? Where's Josh? Over there somewhere. There he is. He's hiding. All right. And then Accumulo and Ranger integration, that should be cool too. I guess Hortonworks has been spending a fair amount of time on that. It's always nice to have a whole ecosystem to provide security there. So that would be great.
Yeah, so true to form, we've got some serious security talks today, so that'll be great. Again, back to the frameworks and APIs, there's several things going on being built on Accumulo today and integrating with Accumulo. So we'll be able to get up to speed on those. That's going to be something called Timely, which is a time series database built on Accumulo. Apache Fluo, we mentioned, is a system for adding transactions and triggering cascading actions on top of inserts in Accumulo. We're going to hear about Minify or Mini-NiFi and Accumulo, which is gets to kind of that common use case of bringing lots of data into Accumulo. And then finally, Presto and Accumulo. Presto is a SQL interface built on Accumulo, which can make, we've seen that having a SQL interface can really help boost the popularity of any project, so that's exciting.
So design, I guess Aaron's lucky he doesn't have to talk about this because nobody wants to promote their own talk, but there's a lot of stuff having to do with table design where if you want to build an application on top of Accumulo, you probably don't want to have to start from scratch because there's a lot of science that goes into picking, how do you design your key. So a couple of good talks on that, data-defined type schema generation, and then just generally choosing a strategy here.
Yeah, definitely one of the better talks you'll want to hear.
Wait, that one or your other talk?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Chad Harden is a director of engineering at Coverse. He's going to talk about some of the interesting stuff we do to automatically discover schemas that anybody can do, frankly. Performance. So Accumulo's always had a strong performance focus, and that hasn't changed. So Adam's going to be giving us a walkthrough of some of the really, I think I saw a version of this, of some of the ideas in this talk earlier, and there's some pretty interesting stuff around how do you make sure the application you're building is actually going to work at scale, at really, really large scale, so that's pretty interesting. There's going to be some talks about optimizing Accumulo in terms of backend for user applications. That's a very common, obviously a common use case for other NoSQL databases. I think it's important for Accumulo. And then everybody's favorite, turning up your iterators to 11. There's, I don't think, any end to the stuff you can learn about iterators. It's a very deep topic, so and we'll be hearing from one of the folks who knows, perhaps one of the folks who knows the most about it, so that'll be interesting, hearing from Ivan. And then finally, we got a couple talks on use cases.
Yeah, so again, talks on this are dominated by Coverse. Thank you, Coverse, for a strong showing today. So Gedalia is going to talk about building production recommendation engine on Accumulo. Cool stuff there. And then some machine learning stuff from Jeremy Kepner. Is Jeremy in? Where's Jeremy? I saw it. Maybe he's not in yet. Hopefully he'll show up for this talk. I saw VJ here, so I guess VJ can give his talk if Jeremy's not there. But and then comparing Accumulo, Cassandra, and HBase, Aaron alluded to some very interesting results here. I'm looking forward to that. I think it's going to be neat to see how the projects have evolved, and maybe a little speculation on how they're going to evolve from here as well. Should be neat.
It's going to be a major bash fest.
Hopefully not of Accumulo, right? Okay. No. Okay. So that's it for our talk today. We probably have some time for questions if you guys want to do it, or if you want to just catch up with each other. I know a lot of people maybe haven't seen each other in a while, so certainly happy to do that before our first talk start. Where's Dan? What's our first talk time? Yeah. Okay. So anybody have questions for us? Anybody want to hear us speculate on Accumulo future? Or interesting questions. We could take those too. No. Okay. Well, have a great summit, guys. It's great to see all the new faces here. And come up and talk to us anytime. And we can help you figure out how to get involved or what projects to work on or whatever else. Thanks.